Live. Everywhere. On netrootsradio.com. David Waldman. Kagro. In the morning. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Friday, March 1st, 2024. We finally made it to March. They added an extra day. Time for some lousy smarch weather. I never really did understand. I mean, I guess the whole Simpsons joke on that one was it was just absurdity. And I was like, well, where would the S come from? Well, it was a calendar misprint. We don't know why it happened. It just did happen. So there you go. All right, lousy smarch weather time. We don't know what kind of lousy smarch weather you might be experiencing. If you're here in the East Coast, everything is pleasant and wonderful, as always, whereas in the wilds of the country, the other places other than the East Coast of the United States of America, everything is terrible. That's what I'm told. There's a, disaster-level snowstorm happening in mountains somewhere. I guess if you're in the mountain time zone, you might be getting struck by this. I don't remember exactly where this is falling and hitting. Where's the Donner Pass? I assume it's there, and they're talking like 10 feet of snow, right? Snowy mix, I am told by Justice Putnam, there in southern Oregon, so that's not quite disaster level, but somebody's getting walloped by snow. At the same time, if you head south a bit, a couple hundred miles, everything is on fire. Scorching hellscape in the Texas Panhandle. So, a little bit of both. March comes in like a snowstorm that dumps 12 feet of snow on you, and also like a raging firestorm in 90-plus degree weather. That's America. We haven't done anything to the weather here. Don't worry about it. Okay, so lots happening. Things we can catch up on. The breaking news this morning, I forgot my water. And then production staff jumped in and helped me out with that one. I complained out loud, and loud enough that I got water out of it. So there you have it. Squeaky wheel theory in action. Lots of other things to catch up on, of course. And golly, I just don't even know what to tell you. Oh, speaking of those Texas fires, I like this line from Justice here. It says, Greg Abbott has burned more towns in Texas than Black Lives Matter ever did. That's a good point. That's the record. We'll just make it official. All right. Oh, yes. And speaking of making it official, I needed to add to our Hall of Fame, as it were, our donor Hall of Fame, a new donor who's come on board on Patreon. So thanks to Travis Vetter, who joined just yesterday, which makes him one of, I guess, maybe the only February 29th initiated donor we have. Although I'm really not so positive about that. When I say I'm not so positive, I mean, I haven't even looked. I just made it up right now. I mean, he really did start donating yesterday, and that was good news, and we thank him for joining the team here, and encourage you to do the same. If you have not, or if you have, we encourage you to sell the house and car and then put that in the pot as well. But always hang on to enough money to get yourself toasted coconut coffee. I'm getting to the end of the first bag, Judy. I'm really making an effort. It's quite good, and I'm looking forward to one of the 2 macadamia nut flavored coffees next, and I'll report to all of you exactly what's going on. Country is disintegrating. End of the rule of law. Democracy is dying. However, I can give a 5-star review to this or that flavor of coffee. This is what you should be drinking during the apocalypse. Fill your bunker with it. Okay. I'm holding on to the Kona, as I'm told that's something super special, and I might. I'm coming up with a batting order here, and I'm trying to think of a way to make it work. And maybe when my house is full of coffee appreciators on a visit, might be the time to break out the Kona plus whatever flavor we have going at the same time. So that's the plan. P.S. Collapse of America. Just thought I would throw that in there for the rest of the day here. Oh, look, there's a new feature on Skype they want you to know about. It's putting it right up in my face. And I'm going to ignore it. I'm going to get to the stories I meant to bring you the other day, including, let's see, one story I teased yesterday and then didn't even give to Scott for the summary, although he may have actually rounded it up on his own now that I think about it. I didn't look to see whether that particular story got mentioned in the write-up. But I mentioned to you, we're kind of past this point in the proceedings. We know how it goes, but I should have set the whole story up days before by reading you this piece from Newsweek, which, I'm looking around. Here we are. What's the date on this piece? February 21st. So, by yesterday it was already a week old. But Donald Trump wants to negotiate with Judge Engoron. And we know kind of how that went, that he came back and said, I know we're supposed to put up a $400 million bond, but how about just a quarter of that? Would that be okay? And I'm good for the rest of it, even though the whole trial was about determining, as it happens, you're actually not good for anything. Well, I mean, you're besides being a good for nothing, you don't have even a fraction of the money that you said you had, which was the whole point of the trial. So the answer to will we accept less just because you're good for it, the answer is no for everybody, for every purpose, whoever wants to do that, and especially no for you. I just thought this was an interesting warning, and just to lay the foundation for the rest of the story, I thought I might share this one with you. Donald Trump's attorney requested to propose, he's asking for a lot of permission here, requested to propose a new judgment on Wednesday in the former president's civil fraud trial ruling, in which Judge Arthur Engoron ruled that Trump will be fined roughly $355 million. And of course, there's the interest that he would have to pay up front as well. They gave us the background of the lawsuit that we can kind of skip over. But on Friday, whichever Friday would be indicated by having published this on February 21st, Engoron ruled that Trump will be fined roughly $355 million, barred from doing business in New York for 3 years after a months-long trial. You know all of that stuff. Trump, the current GOP frontrunner for the 2024 presidential election, has maintained his innocence in the case, even though it's not a matter of guilt and innocence, but hey, and then claimed it was politically motivated. Yada, yada, more yadas. Anyway, the whole point really here was just that this was the early warning that they were going to seek to just blow off the law and say, sure, the law says I'm liable for this much money, and sure, the law says that if I want to appeal, and I do want to appeal, then I do have to put up this bond. But what if I didn't and demanded the right to appeal anyway? Could we somehow push the judges into accepting this? Well, we do have an answer, and the answer came in the form of the Bugs Bunny no JPEG, which we could be making into GIFs these days, but you can't use GIFs on Blue Sky, so we're back to JPEGs for those. Apparently that's not a thing, and they're unlikely to allow that to go forward. And I think it's since been reported, and I think we had the story yesterday, and that I may have included in the list for Scott, but we didn't read the story from the New York Times. I guess this is the upshot of it a week later. Trump rebuffed after asking a judge to delay his $454 million penalty. Again, $355 million in penalties, and the rest in interest. The former president, who is appealing the penalty, but not very appealing, the penalty in his civil fraud case, offered a bond of only $100 million to pause the judgment. And just like everything, I'll give you, 25%. Well, I guess if it's $455 million and he's offering 100, it's a little less than that. That's just his standard MO. That's how he pays plumbers and painters who work on his buildings. It's how he pays for everything. I'll make a deal with you and announce it as the biggest deal ever, but then offer you only a fraction of the money and say, take it or leave it. Except in this case, they can say, well, I'll leave it and maybe put you in jail for contempt of court or something like that, or force you to sell your buildings, which would be, almost as good. Ben Protus and Kate Christobeck put this story together just the other day. Donald J. Trump, in case you had a question, on Wednesday lost his initial bid for a New York appeals court to pause the more than $450 million judgment he faces in a civil fraud case, a decision that could expose him, to financial peril. Oh, all right. Mr. Trump's lawyers had asked the appeals court to allow him to post only a $100 million bond, a promise from an outside company that the judgment eventually will be paid because securing one for the full amount was impossible, they said. Now remember, this was a little choppy, this presentation, but the $100 million bond, it's not $100 million in cash. It's a bond, which itself is just a promise of payment from a third party. But the most he was able to get a third party to be willing to guarantee on his behalf was $100 million. Nobody would say they were willing to step up and cover the liability for all $455 million. A single appellate court judge assigned to consider Mr. Trump's request, Anil Singh, turned him down on Wednesday. Mr. Trump will try again next month because who cares, right? What the judge said it? Who gives? We'll try again next month with a panel of 5 appellate court judges. But for now, the former president is still on the hook to post a bond for the full amount of more than $450 million. And any company providing one would probably require him to pledge cash and other collateral that he does not yet have. If Mr. Trump fails to secure the bond, the New York Attorney General's office, which brought the case accusing him of fraudulently inflating his net worth, can collect the $454 million from him. The Attorney General, Letitia James, is expected to provide Mr. Trump a 30-day grace period, which will expire on March 25th, at which point she could move swiftly to seize Mr. Trump's bank accounts and perhaps take control of his New York properties. That's not so bad. And that's now, it's March 1st, 24, we'll say, days away. Pretty good, and we can count it down. The $454 million judgment was levied by the trial judge in the fraud case, Arthur Engoron, of course, who imposed a range of other punishments on Trump and his family businesses. You know about them. They can't, in addition to not running businesses in New York, they can't obtain a loan from a New York bank for 3 years. And, of course, the ban on running the company in the state during that period. That, of course, makes things even more complicated to line up the bond. I mean, if you think about it, and this is part, I think, of his appeal, and he may have better luck with this part than the will you accept the $100 million instead of 454. And it is interesting that he finds just the most amazing cracks in the legal system, right? You can't appeal the verdict against you unless you put up the bond. That's the rule. But can you offer a $100 million bond instead of $450 million and then say, you should accept this, and then they say no, and you say, well, I'm going to appeal your rejection of my offer. Not my conviction. No, it's not a conviction, but not the judgment against me. I'm appealing your decision not to accept the $100 million. I can do that without putting up the bond, right? And I guess maybe. I don't know. That's a good question. I'm not a New York practitioner, and I couldn't tell you, but it's starting to look like that, which is kind of amazing all by itself. That may be the key. That might be the thing at which Trump's lawyers are best, and maybe better than most. Though most people are just embarrassed to do such a thing. Anyway, but like they were saying, there's also the possibility they might say, well, you need to lower the amount of the bond because how would I raise the bond? One of the things I would need to do to raise the bond would be to say, pledge assets against the bond. Except, what assets do I have? I have assets that are controlled by the Trump organization, and I'm not allowed to run the Trump organization anymore, so I can't direct that those properties be put up as collateral. I need somebody else has to do that, and I don't know if they will. I don't know who's running this place, and I don't know who to ask. That's a problem. And then, of course, well, I need to come up with more cash or something to cover the bond or whatever myself, except I can't get a loan from a New York bank because that's prohibited too. Of course, he could try a Florida bank. He lives in Florida now. But still, I'm sure that he'll be claiming that this puts a hardship on him somehow and that therefore something, and you should take less money. The exorbitant and punitive amount of the judgment coupled with an unlawful and unconstitutional blanket prohibition on lending transactions, would make it impossible to secure and post a complete bond, Trump's lawyers wrote to the appeals court. Justice Singh also paused those punishments on Wednesday, potentially making it easier for him to obtain a bond for the full amount. We'll see. Financial relief might also come from a separate deal. Trump's stake in, not the Trump stakes. Those are terrible. They're not going to make any money for him. This is Trump's stake in Trump Media and Technology Group. His social media company could be worth up to $4 billion after a long-delayed merger is finally made this year, though not in time for Ms. James's March 25th deadline. In its own filing, Ms. James's office asked the appeals court to deny Mr. Trump's request. There is no merit to the defendant's contention that a full bond or deposit is unnecessary because they are willing to post a partial undertaking of less than a quarter of the judgment amount. Why would we do that, right? Defendants all but concede that Trump has insufficient liquid assets to satisfy the judgment. The lawyer for Trump, Christopher Kise, did not immediately respond to requests for comment. However, the case is resolved. Trump's request for relief represented a humbling concession from a man whose public image is synonymous with wealth. His conspicuous displays of gold-plated luxury underpinned his rise to tabloid fame, a stark contrast with the current spectacle of his scrambling to avert financial trouble. Ms. James built her case on the accusation that Trump had fraudulently inflated his net worth by as much as $2 billion, which he's about to do all over again by saying that his stock deal is going to be worth $4 billion. He did so, James argued, to obtain favorable loans and other financial benefits. Well, no wonder he's being fined. Justice Engoron sided with Ms. James, concluding that Trump defrauded his lenders who had expected him to maintain a certain net worth. Trump's net worth is largely derived from real estate, and the sum of the judgment in the civil fraud case and the $83.3 million judgment he faces from a defamation trial involving E. Jean Carroll eclipses his stockpile of cash. As of last year, Trump was sitting on more than $350 million in cash, as well as stocks and bonds that he could sell in a hurry, according to a recent New York Times review of his financial records. Trump appears to be struggling to line up a bond in the defamation case as well. So that one's only $83 million judgment, and he can't work that one out. He has until early next month to do so, and this was, remember, written in February, late February, and it is now early next month. I'm not certain what the date is, but I guess that's coming up soon. And his lawyers in that case, by the way, recently asked the judge to either grant him more time, sure, yeah, or reduce the size of the bond. Yeah, right, whatever. You lose in court, you lose in court. I mean, they should just tighten the screws on the guy. Well, they won't, but they should. A bond, in simplest terms, is a document that a company provides to the court on a defendant's behalf. The bond company promises the court to cover a judgment if a defendant, in this case Trump, loses an appeal and fails to pay. In exchange, Trump would have to pay the bond company a premium fee, typically anywhere from 1% to 3% of the judgment. Trump would also have to pledge collateral to the bond company, offering it cash, stocks, and bonds. All that I have and more, right? Okay. Anyway, although each deal... it wasn't in the accent. That's the other guy's line. Anyway, six-fingered man. Although each deal is different, companies offering appeal bonds might be unwilling to take Mr. Trump's property as collateral, especially if a building already has a mortgage, experts said. That's true. Also, if it's a pile of garbage, you might not want that headache. Legal experts predicted that even if Trump loses before the 5-judge appellate panel, he might still come up with a larger bond, noting that his lawyers did not characterize the $100 million bond as the only possible outcome. It's a starting point for negotiation, so he is negotiating with Engoron. The $100 million bond resembles an opening real estate bid, said Mark Zauderer, a partner at the law firm Dorff, Nelson, and Zauderer. Was Mr. Dorff not available? All right. He's a veteran of New York business litigation and has secured many appeal bonds. But here, the negotiation will end because it is the court that will determine the actual dollar amount of security, not Trump. Okay, just so we're up to speed on that. And now we can add to this picture something I spotted yesterday and didn't get a chance to add into the record. But now I don't find it as easily as I was hoping. But, rats, where is this thing? There was a story about the, there we are, Washington Post story. Trump media co-founders sue the company, alleging a scheme to dilute shares. Remember that when we were just reading about, okay, what might he do in order to post a bond, or how bad is his cash crunch? Well, he's now starting to brag about a $4 billion stock windfall from this media company and the merger. Well, maybe not, because as we said here, the other co-founders of the company are suing. What's happening? Well, first I'll tell you what the subheader says. This case could complicate a long-delayed bid by the owner of Truth Social to go public and deliver former President Donald Trump a financial lifeline. Drew Harwell is writing this piece. It appears in the tech section of the Washington Post, but could just as easily be front page. Except here we are only rooting for injuries. If you saw the pictures of the two dudes who I guess are suing, you'd be hard-pressed to decide which one of these three, these two guys or Trump, should win or should fall in an alligator pit. And maybe they all should. There's pictures of them in their power suits, on their phones, on the streets of New York. It's just too much. Anyway, the co-founders of former President Donald Trump's media company filed a lawsuit on Wednesday claiming that Trump and other leaders had schemed to deprive them of a stake in the company that could be worth hundreds of millions of dollars, and they were really counting on it to pay for those power suits. The case could complicate a long-delayed bid by Trump Media and Technology Group, the owner of the social network Truth Social, to merge with a special purpose acquisition company. Remember the SPACs that we learned about a while back? Called Digital World Acquisition, and become a publicly traded company. But does everybody remember the background of those SPACs, right? That they are essentially, they form as, what do they form as publicly traded companies in the first place? And just say, you can buy shares in this company, the purpose of which is to buy some other company, which is not yet public, merge with it, and then take it public. And then all of you who, basically it's like, give us a check with no idea what we're going to do. We'll tell you later what we're going to buy. But the plan is to buy something profitable. Do you want in? And people just pile money in it, and then they just find some target. Except this time, it sounds, or began to sound, I think at the beginning of this storyline months ago, like they were, I mean, I guess the rules of it are you join in, but they're not supposed to have a target in mind while they're raising this money, a specific target, because otherwise it's just, well, why didn't this other company file their papers and try to raise their money to go public this way? This is a backdoor into funding the company and taking it public. There has to be like no connection between the two, but it started to sound at the beginning of this storyline months ago like this SPAC, Digital World Acquisition, was formed for the purpose of bailing out and buying off this Trump Media and Technology Group. Anyway, I guess they've managed to shake that suspicion and go forward. The merger deal, which could value Trump's stake in the company at more than $3 billion, but remember, he's just told everybody it was $4 billion, and that's why he's in trouble with the law, would offer the former president a financial lifeline at a time when he's facing more than $454 million in penalties from a civil fraud judgment this month in New York, plus another $100 million to E. Jean Carroll, plus who knows what else elsewhere. Anyway, the case is one of 3 lawsuits filed this week that detail bitter recriminations among people key to the Trump company's earliest days. The filings will probably serve as the opening salvo in what could be an all-out legal warfare ahead of the March 22nd shareholder vote on whether to go ahead with the merger. That's coming up too. On Tuesday, Digital World and Trump Media sued Digital World's former chief executive. So both Trump Media and Digital World sued the former Digital World CEO Patrick Orlando. No word on what happened to Dawn in this one. And its sponsor, ARC Global Investments 2, in a Florida court, alleging that Orlando had threatened to block the merger to obtain a windfall by way of extortion. Somehow, I don't know what that means, and accusing him of avarice and incompetence. Oh no, not that. That had caused extensive reputational harm. Imagine the kind of avarice and incompetence you would have to cause extensive reputational harm to a Trump company. On Thursday, ARC filed its own lawsuit telling a Delaware Chancery Court, never mind explaining what Chancery Courts are, that Digital World, its current chief executive, Eric Swider, not Swindler, but Swider, and 3 board members had miscalculated ARC's stake in a way that would deprive it of more than 2 million shares. In a motion to expedite, ARC's attorneys accused Digital World of gamesmanship and strong-arming tactics related to the dispute. ARC, a subsidiary of the Shanghai-based investment firm ARC Capital, provided Digital World's early funding and is managed by Orlando, whom Digital World's board fired last year. I've already lost track, but you can see it's a rather complicated situation. The suit, oh boy, and it's not just the power suit that we're talking about, but the lawsuit. The suit against Orlando alleges that he received a letter from the Securities and Exchange Commission, known as a Wells Notice, indicating that officials had considered charging him for violations of federal securities law, but that the matter was still pending. The SEC and an attorney for Orlando did not immediately respond to requests for comment. The Trump campaign referred comment to Trump Media, which did also not respond to requests for comment. Digital World also staying mum.
Hi, I'm Scott Anderson, the guy that writes the daily summary for this show, Kagro in the Morning. Thank you to everyone that supports this show. Many of you send donations through PayPal, Patreon, Square Cash, Radio Public, and so on. Some of you write your own essays and send them in, or read articles with your own commentary. We appreciate it. Now, some of you are listening to this and thinking, I'd like to help, but isn't there something I could do that wouldn't require money or effort? Why, yes, there is. You can just like us. On Daily Kos, they call it the recommend button. YouTube has a thumbs up. There are hearts and likes and love buttons. Tap our love button. Tap our love button every day. Share our shows and summaries on Facebook and Twitter, YouTube and iTunes, Stitcher and Amazon. Most of these places allow you to write a review, so a sentence or two would be great. Recommend us to social media, or tell your friends to listen to the show. You aren't just helping us, you're helping them find their new favorite thing to listen to. You could change the world. So thank you in advance from me and everybody else in the world.
All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Let's finish up with what's happening, the best we can understand anyway, with Trump Media and or Truth Social Media and Trump Media and the SPAC Digital World acquisition, and who's suing who. I've already lost track, except we've read the names into the record, so technically we all know. And some of you might have had an easier time keeping track of this than me, who's reading and watching things flash on the screen and watching the time all at the same time here. But at any rate, lots of lawsuits going on. And then everybody refusing to talk to the Washington Post about it. Digital World's share price on Thursday plunged almost 9% to $41 amid the turmoil, considering that Digital World has said in an SEC filing that Trump will receive 78 million shares in the post-merger company. The drop equates to roughly a $300 million loss in equity for Trump's stake. So, well, you know, it's still worth a tremendous amount of money, but basically almost the rest of what he needed for the bond disappeared yesterday just on the bad news. And if you're looking for another angle, recall that murdery trader Green apparently, at least initially, put a tremendous part of her net worth into this company and probably also participated in this 9% drop yesterday, and that's always good news. I don't know if she rescued herself from that position at any point. But just something to think about. The co-founders' lawsuit is led by Andy Latinsky and Wes Moss. Those are the two dudes in the power suits mentioned up at the top of the story, who met Trump as contestants on his reality show, The Apprentice. No wonder. They were all dressed up. That was show costume, I guess. The men pitched Trump on the idea of a Trump-branded tech startup. I mean, what kind of tech? I don't know. I mean, there's your basic, that's the level of thinking. They're on The Apprentice. So obviously anything they're going to pitch is going to be Trump-branded. What's it going to be? A Trump-branded tech startup. Yeah, interesting. I mean, I hear tech startups are hot. People make millions, billions of dollars. What's the technology? Don't know. It'll just be a Trump-branded tech, whatever tech we find that people need. If it's an app for ordering, foot powder, maybe. I don't know. We'll see. We'll find a good tech, and then we'll just put a T on it for Trump, not tech, and that'll be the business. Great. You're the winner of The Apprentice or whatever. Maybe they didn't win. You get a free suit. So anyway, the co-founders' lawsuit is led by these two guys. That's interesting, too. They should have told Trump, our business proposal is to sue you later. I wonder if that would have affected the outcome of the game. Anyway, they pitched Trump on the idea of a Trump-branded tech startup and social media platform in early 2021. Oh, that wasn't part of the game. After he lost the White House and was banned from Twitter, which is now called Loserville or something like that. They have a new name for it. Anyway, so they were on The Apprentice. I don't know if they won The Apprentice. And then 20 years later, when Trump loses the election, they're like, hey, I got a deal for, and this is interesting. Well, we're just going to offer you a tech startup. Doing what? Don't know. It's a little late in the game to be running around saying, we're just going to do tech, just tech. Anyway, Trump agreed to the deal because he's an idiot and he was, going to be given a bunch of money. So he talked him into it. He was given 90% of the company. That was the deal. I don't know who they're fooling with their lawsuits at this point, but okay. So I'll take the deal and 90% of the company. Thanks. According to a motion for expedited proceedings filed on Wednesday in the Delaware Court of Chancery by the co-founders partnership, United Atlantic Ventures. I mean, wow. That was their big business idea. We're going to find a tech of some kind that's in the startup stage, put a big T on it, and give you 90% of it. In exchange, you give us, I guess, a bunch of capital, and we buy power suits and phones and live it up until the money's gone. I mean, that's a plan. That's most of tech's plan. Every tech company's kind of like that. The partnership took 8.6%, while an attorney on the deal, Bradford Cohen, was given the remaining 1.4%, the motion states. UAV launched the Trump media business, hired employees, and raised funding while receiving no fee or repayment for its work, the motion said. Though that's probably just bad contracting. And though Latinsky and Moss left Trump Media that year amid a dispute with its current leadership, UAV retained its shares, according to an SEC filing this month from Digital World. What was UAV again? Oh, yeah, United Atlantic Ventures. That's the two guys together who pitched Trump on, we're going to start a company and you're going to get 90% of it. The filing said that Trump was set to receive 78 million shares in the post-merger company, a stake worth more than $3 billion at Thursday's share price, and that UAV would receive more than 7 million shares, a stake worth nearly $300 million. For those two guys, split $300 million is awesome, right? Throughout TMTG's, that Trump Media, I don't know what TG's is, Trump Media Truth Social, I don't know. But throughout TMTG's corporate history, the motion states, UAV's 8.6% partnership or ownership interest has been recognized and honored, but UAV's attorneys allege in the motion that Trump has recently attempted to drastically dilute the partnership's stake as part of what they called an 11th hour pre-merger corporate maneuvering tactic. No, he would not resort to that. Designed to increase the amount of authorized stock from 120 million shares to 1 billion shares. That's a lot. It's a lot more. So there were originally 120 million shares, of which Trump would own 78 million. And now He is just proclaiming, okay, now there's 120 million shares and we can give it to everybody. UAV's attorneys wrote that the dilution scheme had no legitimate business purpose and suggested that Trump and the Trump Media Board planned to issue the new shares to Trump and or his associates and children, watering down UAV's stake to less than 1%. UAV was promised 8.6% of this company. I mean, they started it, right? And sadly, its business partners are baselessly trying to renege. Oh no, you went into business with Trump and he's baselessly trying to renege. I can't believe it. Well, anyway, that was the claim of the partnership's lead attorney, Christopher J. Clark of Clark Smith Villazur, in an interview with the Washington Post describing the lawsuit. They feel like, we made Truth Social for you. You got 90%, but some people just aren't happy with 90%. Yeah, Trump. I mean, you kind of knew it going in. Clark has represented high-profile defendants, including Hunter Biden. Yeah, when? I never heard the guy's name, and maybe it's a good thing. Elon Musk and billionaire businessman Mark Cuban. What a lineup. After representing President Biden's son for several years in negotiations related to a Justice Department investigation. How'd that come out? Clark stepped down in August due to the possibility that he could be called to testify as a witness on Hunter Biden's behalf. That's how it worked out. In the filing, Digital World said the proposed issuing of 1 billion shares in new Digital World stock was part of a set of post-merger business changes. The SEC declared this month that the merger's registration statement was effective, clearing the way for Digital World's shareholders to vote to finalize the merger in a meeting next month. That is now this month. Digital World acknowledged the UAV dispute in the SEC filing, saying it had received letters starting last month from a UAV lawyer asserting that the partnership still had the right to appoint directors to Trump Media's board and to approve or disapprove the creation of additional TMTG shares. UAV, the filing said, argued that its original services agreement with Trump from 2021 remains in effect. Digital World said in its filing that the agreement was declared void by a Trump attorney nearly 2.5 years prior. On what basis? I don't know. They just did, maybe? Digital World said in the filing that Trump Media had said it, quote, strongly disagrees with UAV's assertion to any rights with respect to TMTG under the services agreement, and that it believes TMTG has valid defenses to the potential claims by UAV. Of course, they're going to say that. The filing said a UAV representative sent a text message this month to a Trump Media note holder suggesting that UAV might seek to enjoin or block the merger. The filing also noted that a UAV attorney had sent a letter to Trump Media threatening legal action regarding UAV's alleged rights in TMTG, including, if necessary, an action to enjoin the merger. Digital World said in the filing that the legal dispute could prevent or delay the merger deal, significantly impact the company's future performance, or negatively impact investor confidence and market perception. Oh no. Well, it could. That's true. Delaware, where Trump Media was incorporated, is a common state for American business registrations, and its Chancery Court is a mainstay for corporate litigation. You'll recall that not that long ago, Elon Musk, I think, was angrily tweeting, "Never incorporate in Delaware," because he lost some case there. A sealed legal complaint was filed in the case late on Wednesday. Under Delaware Chancery law, it won't be made public for another 5 days as both sides discuss potential redactions. I guess that's probably over now. A copy of the motion for expedited processing, which outlines the dispute, was publicly visible in court records. So let's see, 5 days and this was written, this was just written and published yesterday, so it's not over yet. The clock's just starting, so sometime in the middle of next week, we may have more detail on this. Just wanted to put that out there. It's not the most important political news today, but just adding to our understanding of the complexities that might lead either to Trump's financial ruin or bail him out in the end somehow again. Just so that we know what's on the horizon. All right. Other stories to share with you, and there are many. On the congressional front, the news is that today was supposed to be tranche 1 of the shutdown, the partial government shutdown, and it isn't happening. And the reason is they reached a CR deal just yesterday. They just booted it into like next week, I think. But, after all the jawboning about, well, we're not going to accept more of these continuing resolutions that just kick the can down the road, they ran out of time and they kicked the can down the road. That's all they could do. The Hill has the last part of the news that gets us past the hurdle of government shutdown here. There's an earlier story about the House passing a bill, but who cares? Because we'll just start with the part where the Senate later passed the same bill, so everything is okay. Senate passes spending bill, punting shutdown threat to next week. Aris Foley and Al Weaver reporting this for The Hill. And the basics of the news. The Senate on Thursday passed a short-term spending bill that punts this week's shutdown threat to later this month. By the way, reminder that this tranche 2 of the shutdown is next week. So they punted this shutdown to the deadline, basically to the deadline of the next shutdown that was coming anyway. No word about whether they're going to punt the next shutdown and whether they'll punt them together or separately. I guess we'll have to wait and see. Anything is still possible. But here we are. They passed a short-term spending bill, punts this weekend shutdown to later in the month, but leaves questions about how Congress will fund the government through the rest of the year. Senators voted 77-13 to send the funding measures to President Biden's desk for his signature. Remember, that's not even required. He can just let that go. All right, whatever. Anyway, that all just hours after the House voted overwhelmingly to pass the bill, 320-99. And just a day before, a tranche, there's the word, of government funding was set to expire. GOP senators, who was voting no on this, who was a foot-stomping holdout in the Senate, Marsha Blackburn, Mike Braun, I think he says Brown. We keep doing this with him, but who cares? Ted Budd, you remember him? He's from North Carolina. Mike Crapo, Ted Cruz, Josh Hawley, Ron Johnson, Mike Lee, Roger Marshall, Kansas, Eric Schmidt of Missouri, Rick Scott of No Hair, and Tommy Tuberville of, La La Land. Oh, also J.D. Vance voted against the measure, just in case you wanted the lineup in the Senate. I don't have the House lineup on hand, but they never do that in these things because there's 99 of them. It's easier to list the 13, but it's all publicly available if you want to find out who the 99 were. The stopgap bill will maintain funding for the Departments of Agriculture, Interior, Transportation, Housing and Urban Development, Veterans Affairs, Energy, Justice, Commerce. Energy got listed again. So, Energy got twice. You get twice the money. Yay, 2 times the budget for the Energy Department. Also, there's a couple other offices in there as well through March 8th. So, yeah, a 1-week punt on that, a 1-week CR. Keeping in mind that tranche 2 was supposed to expire, I think, on March 8th anyway. But let's see. Lawmakers will have until March 22nd to wrap up fiscal 2024 funding for the Pentagon, the legislative branch, and foreign operations, as well as the Departments of Labor, Health and Human Services, Education, State and Homeland Security. Okay, I guess, does that mean... I'm not certain what they did here. The stopgap bill will maintain the funding through March 8th. So, yeah, that's a 1-week CR. And I guess maybe tranche 2 I thought was supposed to expire next week, but I guess this article makes it look like tranche 2, I guess, is set to expire on March 22nd. And then they'll have to deal with that one. The passage of this new 1-week CR comes a day after the Senate and House leaders announced that the bipartisan funding patch, which marks the 4th stopgap Congress has had to pass for fiscal 2024. The stopgap bought lawmakers more time to come to an agreement on a full year funding, but hurdles remain. House GOP leadership confirmed Thursday that the bill text for the first package of 6 bills will come out over the weekend. As top appropriators have indicated, negotiators are close to wrapping up loose ends on the forthcoming minibus. All the terminology is coming out today. Rosa DeLauro, top Democrat on the House Appropriations Committee, told reporters Thursday that no poison pills made it into the funding package, referring to the laundry list of partisan legislative riders Republicans were pursuing in funding talks. So that'll shake Mike Johnson's grip on the speakership if people had the backbone to throw him out, but they've just hated that speakership fight so much that they're just going to accept it, I think, at least for the time being. Those proposed riders had included measures targeting abortion access, the Biden administration's orders on diversity and gender identity, and a host of others that have drawn the ire of Democrats. That is, the ire about it's interesting, drawn the ire of Democrats. They are, of course, powered by the ire of Republicans. No need to point that out, though. I mean, this is culture war issues, things that bother Republicans, like a trans person got a beer once, and somebody's dating a football player. We got to do something about that. They draw the ire of Democrats because Democrats get irate about stupid things being done to the government over cultural grievances. Yeah, that does draw ire. Anyway, while hardline conservatives have been ramping up calls for GOP leadership to secure partisan policy changes into bills amid spending talks, Speaker Mike Johnson has tempered expectations for Republicans that were expecting grand slams, given that, one, they don't control the Senate, and two, they have like a 2-seat majority in the House. They were expecting grand slams, though. We're always tacking to the middle. They're expecting grand slams. Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer has called on Johnson multiple times to disregard the hardliners of his party who wanted him to fight for additions that could have jeopardized an agreement. As I said directly to the Speaker over and over and over again, the only way to get things done here is with bipartisanship, and this agreement is another proof point. Schumer said on the floor earlier Thursday, I hope this sets the stage for Congress to finish the appropriations process in a bipartisan way very soon. The exclusion of those policy writers has angered conservatives. Rawr. And while spending cardinals, that is to say the chairs of the subcommittees, the appropriations subcommittees are the cardinals, while spending cardinals are optimistic about the coming March 8th deadline, some have indicated more work is needed to wrap up the remaining 6 bills that come due March 22nd. Representative Dave Joyce of Ohio, chair of the subcommittee that crafts the annual funding bill for the Department of Homeland Security, told reporters on Thursday that negotiations around the coming plan are still being hashed out. He noted the difficulty appropriators face in trying to craft what are considered some of the tougher measures after both parties headed into negotiations with drastically different funding proposals. Some of the dollars that we were appropriated are going to securing the border, more detention beds, better use of technology, while Democrats have leaned more towards NGOs, which make us angry because reasons, and facilitating processes, folks at the border and asylum claims. Oh, I see. Processing folks. Okay. He said, therein lies a little bit of a dilemma. You can see the vast differences. One group wants to secure the border, add more detention beds, and use more technology, whereas another group wants to use NGOs and facilitating processing folks at the border. Yeah, totally different. Well, anyway, what they really want is to drown them in a river, and the rest of us want to say, well, if they come into this country and want to work hard and escape oppression and death, that's okay. Senator Chris Van Hollen, who heads the subcommittee that handles the IRS funding bill, said, the IRS bill, okay, said Thursday negotiators are still working through the numbers that are not finalized. I mean, at this point, I guess you get the idea. They're going to have to hash things out, and the two sides disagree about what they're going to do, but they do agree that they don't want to shut down, so they punt. There you have it. That's where we now stand. All right, I'll move on to a couple other stories and save some of the larger and longer reads for the second half. Here are a few other smaller bore stories that you should know about. One, I'll give you the latest that I have on this one. We had an initial story that something was happening, and then that something went the other way for Trump, and he's appealing already. So we'll get right to the appeal stage with this piece from The Guardian. Rachel Leingang having reported that Trump is appealing, that is to say he lost and is now appealing, an Illinois judge's ruling, we missed it right from the outset, an Illinois judge's ruling removing him from the primary ballot, another one of these eligibility cases. Judge Tracy Porter had ordered Trump's removal from the presidential ballot for his role in the U.S. Capitol attack. And then angry-looking picture of a decomposing Trump is included to illustrate the piece. Donald Trump has appealed a decision from an Illinois state judge who decided he should be removed from that state's ballot because of the 14th Amendment, an ongoing issue for the Trump campaign in the courts. Tracy Porter, Cook County Circuit Judge, made the decision on Wednesday, reversing the previous decision by the Illinois State Board of Elections, which said Trump could stay on the ballot. Interesting. I think we might have heard that one, and I kind of thought they were going to let that one lie, to be honest. The order was put on hold pending appeal from Trump, which came swiftly on Thursday. So, same procedural posture as most of them. Yes, the judge has said this, but has also said, I'll stay my decision pending review from a higher court. The Illinois decision came after the Colorado Supreme Court ruled similarly, saying Trump couldn't hold office again because he had participated in an insurrection while an officer of the United States. Another decision in Maine by the state's Secretary of State decided to keep Trump off the ballot there as well, though that is now on hold. They're all on hold. The Colorado decision went before the U.S. Supreme Court in February, which has yet to rule on the case, though the justices expressed a load of skepticism of the claims that Trump shouldn't be allowed to run again. They shouldn't have, but they did. The 14th Amendment's third clause, a little used provision of the Constitution, because most people just simply don't violate the part of the Constitution where they violate their oath to the Constitution and foment insurrection. It is little used, though. It's true. Came out of the Civil War, of course, in the Reconstruction era, and intends to keep those who engaged in insurrection from holding an office again. Yeah. It was used mostly against Confederates shortly after its adoption, but some legal scholars and activist groups revived it recently to argue that Trump fit its provisions because of his actions to overturn the results and incite an insurrection after he lost the 2020 election. Because it works. It does fit it. Voters in several states, often backed by nonprofits, seeking to hold Trump accountable, have filed challenges to keep him off the ballot over the 14th Amendment. Trump has called these efforts election interference. And whatever. We got to wait and see how that one's going. But we were initially told the Illinois effort was a no-go. But a judge has intervened to say it's a maybe go. But I'm staying my own decision to go until a higher court can review it. And then another court can review that. And then another court can review that. We'll have to wait and see. And what else can happen? Her ruling could be upheld by an appellate court in Illinois. They may have an intermediate appellate court. I don't know. Then they might take it to the Illinois Supreme Court. And then the Illinois Supreme Court's decision may or may not be appealed to the U.S. Supreme Court, and yada, yada, yada. So on with this, just trying to keep up with all of the places where Trump is in court. Loves to litigate. Let's see. Another story I thought I would add, maybe this is a good opportunity to bring this up. I had a empty wheel post from Blue Sky yesterday that was referring to other people's threads, basically reminding people about people who are complaining, and they're right to complain just out of frustration. But there's another side to the story of how slow these things are going in the court and how this lingers on forever and ever, and we worry about the wheels of justice turning slowly. A good reminder from Marcy here that this is something that is extraordinarily difficult for a process-oriented outfit like the Justice Department to deal with. And maybe it's just, these guys are outstripping the ability of our institutions to handle them. But, this is how she puts it. Keeping in mind, like, what took Merrick Garland and the Justice Department so long to bring these cases such that they're coming so late in the game that they might be postponed until after the election? Well, she points out here, and pointing to Brendan Nyan's description of things, that there were 25 attorneys who invoked various kinds of privilege in these cases that the DOJ was trying to bring, right? Upwards of 10 who invoked executive privilege, and one defendant who invoked speech and debate clause privileges. And the entire conspiracy, by the way, conducted on encrypted apps, which, by the way, just creates another hurdle, another litigation hurdle towards just getting the evidence to bring these cases forward. In addition, you got 20, 30 different kinds of privilege to have to deal with, and each one of those requires having firewalled review teams and litigation over how much of it can enter into evidence and sorting through, and maybe special masters becoming necessary. Enormous muddying of the waters just to figure out which ones of the people who are involved in the case who happen to be attorneys can have their records reviewed. So it is quite a mess. People really need to stop claiming, Marcy says, that 2.5 years during a pandemic to do all of this was actually slow walking the case. That was, these reviews can take years. And, unfortunately, this whole thing unfolded slowly. And yes, that's going to have an effect on how the outcome works because of the fact that the elections are timed to come up when they come up. But there wasn't a whole lot of opportunity to do this a lot faster and respect due process in the law, which is kind of sad and ironic given how little respect there is for due process in the law on the other side of this. They get to benefit from it, but they don't intend to offer it to anybody else once they rig up the election in their favor. Anyway, she was pointing to Brendan Nyhan's thread here, or comment saying this is an interesting thread from someone else that he's taken pictures of here, arguing that the courts have moved very quickly on Trump cases so far and that the problem is DOJ delay in filing the case. Now, that's not wrong, he says, but it doesn't undermine criticisms of SCOTUS either, in his opinion. But yeah, she was actually saying that, well, maybe it is kind of wrong a little bit. Maybe it isn't. DOJ delay in filing the case is very easily explained by the fact that they had to clear the hurdles of 25 different attorneys in the case claiming attorney-client privilege prevented the DOJ from reviewing their records, not to mention the encryption that they were using and had to get around by use of subpoenas against the encrypted platforms as well. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Let me run through this thread that Brendan Nyhan was commenting on, and then you just got Marcy's comment on Brendan's. So I think Brendan represents a layer in between here. He's showing us screen caps of the Twitter thread by one Dylan Esper and commenting, well, it's not so much that things are being slow walked by the courts, but that DOJ was late in filing. And then Marcy reminding us, well, the reason DOJ was quote unquote late in filing is the layers and layers and layers of barriers and hurdles and crap that they had to cut their way through in order to be able to put together a case that could make it as far as it has. And many of these cases would have been thrown out a lot earlier on procedural grounds if they had just said, to hell with it, we're seizing all the evidence and all of your claims of privilege they're just wrong. So we're just going to take all your evidence, and that would never have worked out in our system. But here, Dylan Esper makes the original effort at explaining all of this, saying this narrative of the courts are slow walking Trump's immunity claim, for the most part, is coming from, as Dylan says, from non-lawyers who don't understand anything about the system, and it's truly pissing him off, or her off, I don't know, D-I-L-A-N, Dylan, I'm not certain of the gender, but they're pissing Dylan off. So here's the real story, I guess, as Dylan sees it anyway, and it's plausible, so that's why I thought I'd share it with you. President Trump was indicted last August. Notably, that's the biggest slow walk of all. An August 2023 indictment for a January 2021 alleged crime, and 10 months after, Jack Smith was appointed. But Smith is a saint among men and, quote, on our team, so he cannot be criticized. Well, I don't know whether that's supposed to be ironic or tongue-in-cheek. But anyway, President Trump's motion to dismiss was filed on September 29th, less than 2 months after the case commenced. Judge Chutkan, who again gets no criticism because she's on the right team, decided it on December 1st, a 2-month delay. Nonetheless, to be clear, Judge Chutkan deserves no criticism for this. 2 months from filing to decision on a motion to dismiss in federal court is very fast. Usually you're looking at 6 months or more. This case was expedited. Donald Trump had a right under law to appeal this ruling to the Court of Appeals and to stay the trial court proceedings while he did it. You may not like this rule, but it applies to anyone raising an immunity defense, not just Donald Trump. Although it doesn't necessarily follow that the immunity defense be treated as an interlocutory appeal. There's certainly plenty of precedent for proceeding with the trial and then appealing any conviction on the basis that the trial should never have taken place in the first place. But, I mean, you can understand why a political candidate would want to treat this as an interlocutory appeal. I don't want a guilty verdict reported during my election, especially if the whole thing should have been thrown out in the first place. It is curable after the fact, but there's some different circumstances here for a political candidate. Anyway, President Trump, of course, took his appeal, and the court concluded briefing in just 1 month on his appeal, and then held oral argument on January 9th and decided the case on February 6th. That's the D.C. Circuit. This is lightning fast. Most courts of appeals take about 1.5 years between commencement and conclusion of their case. That's true. That's a good point. Further, the D.C. Circuit itself broke a norm to speed up the case further, and nobody criticized it for breaking this norm. It's a technical issue, but the mandate is the date on which a court of appeals judgment goes into effect. And remember, we were speaking of the mandate just yesterday when we were talking about the way that the Supreme Court had structured its grant of cert and suspending the mandate from the Court of Appeals, that the Court of Appeals mandate should not issue until the Supreme Court has had its say, in effect staying the Court of Appeals' decision without actually doing so. Anyway, that was yesterday's discussion. In a normal case, Dylan Esper continues, you get 15 days to petition the court to rehear the case in case some error was made, or to suggest that the full court, rather than just a 3-judge panel, hear the case, and then decisions take effect 7 days after that. The D.C. Circuit panel took those 22 days in total, the 15 and the 7, away from Trump. It did so even though we have no idea if the full D.C. Circuit actually might have wanted to hear the case. It doesn't matter, the panel said. We won't let you. The decisions takes effect immediately, unless, of course, the Supreme Court says no, it doesn't. So, President Trump was forced to file immediately for U.S. Supreme Court review. Even here, his time was cut. Normally, you'd get 3 months to file a petition to the Supreme Court. The D.C. Circuit gave Trump a week. Again, enormous speed. President Trump filed his application for SCOTUS to take the case on February 12th. SCOTUS decided within just 16 days to grant the application. And then SCOTUS set a highly expedited briefing schedule. Normally, a case that is taken by the Supreme Court on February 28th will be briefed through spring and summer and heard in October when the new term starts and decided the following January or so. But SCOTUS held all briefings would be done by April, and it will be argued in oral arguments in the week of April 22nd. That sets up for decision in early May, maybe June. A motion that was filed in September goes through all 3 levels of the federal court system and gets decided by May. That is fast, right? So that's what they point out here. A motion filed in September goes through the district court, the Court of Appeals, and the Supreme Court, decided, well, not by May necessarily. Everybody else was saying probably last day of June. before they finally were forced to issue their ruling. And even then, they might not be. Want to know what regular order looks like? Well, Judge Chutkan takes 6 months, ordinarily, to rule on the motion to dismiss, and then rules on it in the last week of March of 2024. Then the D.C. Circuit appeal takes a year and is decided in March of 2025. Throw on another month for the en banc review denial. Trump petitions for certiorari in the spring of 2025, ordinarily, and his petition is granted, and the case is briefed in the summer and early fall and is argued in November of 2025. Decided around March 2026. That's what regular order is. This case has been expedited by almost 2 years total. This is a good argument. It's reasonable. I mean, it's not fast enough, but it is what it is. And if you want to argue that a May of 2024 decision is still too late, or June for that matter, well, SCOTUS only controls the last 3 months of that delay. The rest of it, blame the liberal Judge Chutkan and D.C. Circuit, and especially the DOJ, which didn't bring the case for 2.5 years. But that's where Marcy chimes in and says, how fast can you bring a case with 37 defendants claiming high-level constitutional privilege that requires all sorts of firewalling and kid gloves treatment inside the DOJ, on top of the fact that all of the evidence comes from encrypted sources. Anyway, Dillon concludes, seriously, the court system took almost 2 years off a case that DOJ took 2.5 years to bring. The Supreme Court itself took 8 months off the case, and we're blaming the Supreme Court? This is utterly wrong, says Dillon. The reality is, once the DOJ decided it would take 2.5 years to bring January 6th charges, the goose was cooked. And that is the case even though the federal courts, including SCOTUS, tried to pull it out of the oven quicker at the end. All right. Well, that's the end of the rant, although I think upon reflection and having seen what Marcy had to say about this, you'd have to come to this conclusion. I don't think the courts would have been in any position to make expedited decisions about any of these things had not the Department of Justice been so thoroughgoing and careful in constructing its case. Any part of the things that the DOJ spent 2.5 years sorting out could have simply been used by the courts to trip this stuff up earlier anyway. And very unlikely that the courts would have expedited the review earlier on, further away from the 2024 elections. What's the case for believing that in 2021, the courts decide on the basis of, we got to beat the deadline of the 2024 elections to expedite cases of appeals of the use of subpoenas to get evidence off of an encrypted platform, or expedite reviews and appeals from the questions of how to settle the privilege issues. I mean, those things had to be litigated, and you can see basically where the delay is built into the DOJ case, that they had to proceed very slowly because there was no reason. I mean, the courts were involved in the early questions of privilege. It wasn't just rulings from the DOJ that everybody said, yeah, those will probably stand up in court. Everybody appealed those decisions, and they went through the regular appeals process. There's no discussion here from Dylan Esper, at least in this thread. Maybe in some other place they discuss, Dylan may have addressed the question of, why does it take 2.5 years? Well, because if you're fighting over privilege questions and then appealing every outcome of every one of those privilege questions as far as you can take it, that's going to take you 2.5 years, especially if at that point the courts are saying, we got plenty of time to settle these issues. They really didn't. They probably should have looked ahead. But this is just a matter of all of the wheels of justice having to turn slowly. There's no discussion here from Dylan Esper as to what might have made DOJ take 2.5 years to get a solid case to court that they could rack up wins, even though they had to defend them all on appeal over and over again. So a good point, I think, in bringing all of this up. And I'm sure we'll be hearing more from Marcy about that one in the future. She may also have written that up in long form. But here it was on Blue Sky and easy to grab. Just something I'll shoehorn in here because it's Friday. Thought you might be interested in finding out more, perhaps, about Tyler Boebert, Lauren Boebert's son, having been arrested the other day. We got the news from Greg. That was a sort of breaking news situation that he had been picked up on a whole number of charges that basically constituted a crime spree. So here you go. Here's the family values thing once again in Republican land out in Colorado. Not only do we know that Tyler Boebert was picked up on any number of charges, it turns out that the victims are suffering even greater losses than initially expected. Here's Business Insider's headline on this. And maybe do we need to hear more than just the headline? One of the victims in Tyler Boebert's alleged theft spree said that the money that was stolen was money that she was saving to pay for a brain tumor surgery. Wow. Not that it, would have made any difference to Tyler Boebert. It just happens to add a tear-jerker element to the human side of this story. Let's see. How long would it take to read through this? One of the victims of Colorado GOP Representative Lauren Boebert's teenage son has been accused of stealing from one of the people that he's accused of stealing from told investigators she has a brain tumor and now won't be able to pay for her surgery, according to newly released court documents. Tyler Boebert, 18, was arrested on Tuesday by Colorado's Rifle Police Department. That's not a special kind of department. That's the name of the town, Rifle, in connection with a spate of local property thefts and car break-ins. Don't keep your brain tumor money in your car. That's not where it was. He faces more than 20 charges, including several felony charges relating to a string of crimes. According to an arrest affidavit, Tyler Boebert, along with a group of apparently underage pals, has been accused of recently busting into 4 cars in the city of Rifle and stealing wallets and credit cards to make purchases at several businesses, including McDonald's, Starbucks, and gas stations. They were hungry. What can I tell you? By the way, something to not keep in your car glove compartment, your wallet and credit card. Keep it with you. A 33-year-old victim who said she had her Chevy Cruze broken into and a wallet taken on February 21st told police that she wants the people who did this to her found because she literally has nothing, the arrest affidavit says. I mean, that's the story of theft. All she had left was $75 in cash inside her stolen wallet and an undisclosed amount of money on 2 Venmo debit cards that were also in the wallet. Don't do that. Okay, let's see. The victim told investigators that she has a brain tumor and now does not have money to get her surgery. Although $75 wasn't going to do it. I don't know how much was on the Venmo cards. Clearly she's in a bad place, and you'll probably pretty soon see her go the GoFundMe route to try and get that money together. Pretty common story here in America, and it'll be portrayed as a great feel-good story too. The community came to her rescue. Well, she should have been able to get her brain tumor surgery regardless, but that's another subject for another day. Okay. Just wanted to sort of let you know where we stood with this Tyler Boebert thing. And Mom's not going to be getting any great publicity out of this one. Anyway, now she has, of course, great empathy, or should have it if there was any logic, for, because the rest of the story is, I will never give up on my son. I'll always be there for him, and I love my son, and yeah, we have problems. It breaks my heart to see him struggling, but here we go. I'm going to be standing by him through thick and thin, just like the president says about Hunter Biden. But never mind that, because that's him, and this is me, and I'm important, and he's not. That's republicanism for you. Or she may have some sort of epiphany, and as it often does, it takes having exactly the same problem for yourself in your own family for a Republican to come to realize the concept of empathy. All right. Let's see. Other things that I wanted to use Friday time for. Let's start with this piece that I had set aside the other day from Brian Beutler at his off-message newsletter, I guess you would call it. I don't know. Blog is what it is, but, newsletter is what now people call it. With this idea. I thought this was an intriguing thought. Biden, the guy who's president, Biden should tell the public what the government knows about Trump's collusion. Yeah. He should. Now, ordinarily, you don't say these things unless you're charging him in court and willing to prove it, and et cetera, et cetera. And they're working on that. But also, as you know, the president is immune from a lot of things. So maybe he would be immune from disclosing this information too. But more to the point, Brian was posting the other day that basically what he was looking for here is for Biden to avoid the mistake made by the perhaps more naive, more trusting, more institutionalist, and possibly still thought he had a reason to be such an institutionalist, Barack Obama. We're reminded that during the 2016 election, the government was, in fact, in possession of plenty of evidence that there was election interference and collusion going on between the Trump campaign and the Russians. And I mean, the Trump campaign announced as much, of course, but was very cautious about what to do with that information and had at some point pondered letting the American public know just what the hell they were being asked to vote on in 2016, but instead said, screw it, because Mitch McConnell said, we will make everything. We'll make life in America a living hell, which we were planning to do anyway, if you let voters know what decision they're really being asked to make here. And Obama kind of backed away from that. Remember, at the time, he thought, he was still dealing with a normal country. Biden, who has much more information about how abnormal the country has become and what the stakes really are here, ought to make a different decision, I think is what Brian is getting at. Biden should tell the public what the government knows about Trump's collusion. Subheader, we have a right to know because we have a right to a free and fair election. Our norms can't be exploited to help a corrupt candidate cover up his cheating. Let's see how he puts it in longer form. In 2016, senior Obama administration national security officials wanted to apprise the country of Russian efforts to subvert the ongoing election, to help Donald Trump beat Hillary Clinton through acts of criminal sabotage. And it takes a lot, by the way, to get the senior administration national security officials wanting to disclose information like this at that stage of the game and that stage of development of that information to the public. It wasn't just that they wanted to win the election, I don't think, but also it clearly, ordinarily their option is for maintaining, if not secrecy, discretion in disclosing this information. Very often there are lots of bits and pieces of useful information that Americans probably have the right to know, but that they on balance simply say, well, national security demands are such that, yes, we had to keep this from you. And in this case, interesting that the national security officials were advocating in the opposite direction here. But anyway, this goes on to say the officials also wanted buy-in from top Republicans on Capitol Hill. Well, duh, they didn't get that. They imagined a unified bipartisan front would tip off the media and discerning members of the public that this was the real deal. But when they briefed congressional leaders about the underlying intelligence and asked for their cooperation, then Senate Majority Leader McConnell shut them down. Not only did he refuse to attach his name to a joint statement, but he warned that if the officials went ahead without him and mentioned Russia's partisan motivations, he would accuse them of politicizing U.S. intelligence services to help Hillary Clinton. Well, the administration blinked. They instead released an unusual, concerning, but ultimately vague statement about the subversion campaign, but without ascribing motive. The U.S. intelligence community is confident that the Russian government directed the recent compromises of emails from U.S. persons and institutions, including from U.S. political organizations. The statement read, boringly enough, the recent disclosures of alleged hacked emails on sites like dcleaks.com and WikiLeaks and by the Guccifer 2.0 online persona are consistent with the methods and motivations of Russian-directed efforts. These thefts and disclosures are intended to interfere with the U.S. election process. And you know what we have to say to that. Pretty boring, right? By the time they got around to releasing it on October 7th, then FBI Director James Comey had withdrawn his name as well for the darkly comic reason that it was too close to November for the FBI to be making statements about the election. The only signatories were Director of National Intelligence James Clapper and Homeland Security Secretary Jay Johnson. So, McConnell's cover-up didn't last forever. We went on to learn of the intelligence community's strong consensus that Russia intervened in the election to help Trump. We also learned that connections between the Trump campaign and Russian intelligence ran deep, and that the two entities cooperated in this sabotage effort. But by then, it was much too late. Trump won the election as a popular vote loser by the narrowest of electoral college margins and went on to do untold damage to the United States. The big blink turns out to have been a big mistake. It's wrong to say history is repeating itself because it never really stopped. Russia tried to help Trump win in 2020 through a botched effort to smear Joe Biden, which ultimately saw Trump corrupt the U.S. foreign policy process. When Biden won anyhow, the operation simply continued and ultimately, through the dissemination of fabricated evidence, formed the basis of a fictional corruption scandal that has damaged Biden over years and culminated in a Republican effort to impeach him. The government's meager deterrence efforts clearly haven't worked. With all that damage done, enough perhaps to explain his 2 points deficit in national polls, Biden should commit to ensuring this foul partnership produces no further success. He can do this by keeping the public informed of any ongoing cooperation between Russia, the Trump campaign, and Trump's allies in the GOP as we approach the November election. Trump may win anyhow, but at least will have been warned. Biden knows from experience that exposing an adversary's devious plans before they've been executed can reduce their effectiveness and sway public opinion. All right. I don't know if there's more to this or not, or whether this is where we finally hit the paywall, but I think that might actually be it for the moment. Anyway, it's a good thought and something he ought to give some attention to, the idea of not repeating the mistakes of the Obama administration, given how much more we know about the damage that can be done, what the stakes are, and how deep the collusion actually goes. It's well worth considering. Yes. All right. So something to think about, and it actually gave me, I was just thinking about the fact that the Supreme Court is now entertaining Trump's appeal on the immunity case. I was sort of thinking yesterday about what the briefs were going to look like and who was going to be behind writing it. But it must thrill the Russians to no end even if they're not involved in this aspect of it. If they are, it's so much the worse that they're also interfering in our Article 3 judiciary operations. But who knows? But they must be. I wonder if they're thinking along the lines of this being just a win-win situation for them. I don't know. Did we mention this yesterday? The idea that, oh yes, right. Since we were mentioning that Trump was essentially saying, well, he must be, or there was at least a plausible claim that he was immune from even some overtly criminal activity if he did it while he was president, or even, who knows, he still believes in this sort of weird perpetual immunity idea. But the idea that if drone strikes that could be used to kill American citizens were immune from prosecution, then certainly his actions on January 6th ought to be immune similarly. And the idea that the Russians might, in fact, whether they're involved in it or not, might be licking their chops at the idea that, well, even if this, no matter how this case comes out, we create difficulties for the next American president. But imagine if Trump were able to convince people, yeah, maybe there should have been criminal liability for using drone strikes to kill American citizens. A legal holding by the Supreme Court that dramatically reduces the power of the American president to project American force abroad and use drone strikes overseas. What a huge win that would be for the Russians. And if they don't, well, the other result ain't bad either. Hi everybody, it's me, David Waldman. Yes, the same guy who interrupts you all the time. Interrupting you one more time just to tell you again, another reminder that your contributions are what keep this show on the air, and patreon.com, patreon.com, is still among the easiest ways to make the sustaining subscription donations that keep us afloat. Are you ready for the pep talk about how our Patreon campaign is still going strong and growing? Well, too bad. Yeah, the plain fact is we actually are headed in the wrong direction, and whereas we once had about 175 monthly patrons, we're now actually down below 150. Time to recruit some more. Not exactly the kind of news I wanted to share, but there it is. For those of you in a position to support the show, patreon.com does make it easy to make those secure, recurring monthly contributions to do so. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. We've been through a lot together. The worst of the pandemic, we hope. The worst of the insurrection, we hope. So go ahead and treat yourself. You don't need an excuse. Give yourself the gift of a little something you enjoy in life. Support the show. And of course, if you happen to prefer using PayPal or even the Square Cash app, we're up and running on those options too. So thanks again, everyone, for all your support. We couldn't, or at least shouldn't, do it without you. Hope you'll be on board soon too. Thanks for all your support. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Net Roots Radio. So as we were trailing off in our last break, just trying to sum up the thought, but actually I think we expressed it pretty well yesterday, and I'm recalling having discussed it at least a little bit yesterday, that Russians must be very interested in the outcome of that case. Either something that could curtail the ability or, threaten the ability of a president to project force abroad, or simply declare that, pretty much anything goes for an American president because of some sort of sovereign immunity or qualified immunity, at the very least, and that a Donald Trump restored to office could simply say, look, as a matter of policy, it's okay. One, that we are not allowed to project force abroad. And two, I decline to stand in the way of Russia or exposing us to that danger and projecting its force abroad. And it's not impossible. I don't know whether it rises to the level of drone strikes or missiles or nuclear war, for that matter, but certainly the West has been baffled as to what to do over the fact that the Russians have felt emboldened to assassinate with poison people who are under the protection of the British system. Was Skripal a British citizen at that point? His daughter probably was. I'm not certain whether they both were, but assassinating people on British soil. We definitely don't stand for that, except what the hell are we supposed to do exactly in the face of a lunatic that might threaten us with nuclear war and drag the whole of NATO into it, except screw it, we're withdrawing from NATO. I don't know what to tell you. The damage could be pretty major. I don't think there's a losing position, though, for the Russians in seeing this case go to the Supreme Court, especially with the arguments that are being made. Anyway, let me jump off of that topic and try something else that I've been holding on to. I just saw this circulated in social media not that long ago, I think by Henry Farrell, who's one of the co-authors of this piece, just sort of looking back almost in surprise, reminding himself, oh yeah, I once wrote this thing that looks awfully prescient right now. I mean, now everybody kind of understands what happened and that it was really and truly the case. But anyway, just sort of interesting as a look back at what people were predicting before it became common knowledge what could happen, because we watched it happen on January 6th. This is an interesting look back on things. So Henry Farrell is co-author along with Bruce Schneier on this piece from November 19th, 2018. And I think this is probably, we've discussed in the show before. We discussed it when they were written, and then we looked back and said, remember how we were reading stories in September and October of 2020 about the red teaming and wargaming of the election situation, and how might Trump look to exploit the vagaries of the electoral system and the judicial system in this country come November by claiming that, the in-person votes have been counted and it looks like we're ahead, and so therefore stop the count, and claim victory before all of the absentee ballots and mail-in ballots and ballot drop box ballots were all counted, et cetera, et cetera. And then, from there, claim fraud, forge electoral votes, stage an insurrection, whatever it takes to hold on to power. None of which worked in the end, but thankfully, but only barely. Anyway, this is a piece from 2018, 2 years prior to any that we had read warning of the same thing, which I thought it was very interesting. Henry Farrell was correct to point back to this one in Vice magazine, Vice.com. The Vice media empire deteriorating as we speak. But here it is. The most damaging election disinformation campaign came from Donald Trump, not Russia, right? So if you don't believe the Russia stuff, I guess you could just look at what Donald Trump did and point to that. This is an interesting point. Subheader reads, the Kremlin has been focused on undermining trust in American democracy and elections, but Donald Trump and the Republicans have done it better than Russia ever could. So good for them, right? Political union with Russia to own the globalists. Here's the story. Let's see. On November 4th, 2016, the hacker Guccifer 2.0, I was reminded of this because that name came up just minutes ago, I think reading through Brian Beutler's piece, was it? So, on November 4th, 2016, the hacker Guccifer 2.0, a front for Russia's military intelligence service, claimed in a blog post that the Democrats were likely to use vulnerabilities to hack the presidential elections. In other words, every Republican accusation is a confession. Once again, even if it's an international actor on behalf of Republicans. On November 9th, 2018, President Donald Trump started tweeting about the senatorial elections in Florida and Arizona. Without any evidence whatsoever, he said that Democrats were trying to steal the election through, quote, fraud, which he made, of course, in all caps. Remember, this is 2018. So, cybersecurity experts would say that posts like Guccifer 2.0's are intended to undermine public confidence in voting, a cyber attack against the U.S. democratic system. Yet Donald Trump's actions are doing far more damage to democracy. So far, his tweets on the topic have been retweeted over 270,000 times, eroding confidence far more effectively than any foreign influence campaign. We need new ideas to explain how public statements on the internet can weaken American democracy. Cybersecurity today is not only about computer systems, it's also about the way attackers can use computer systems to manipulate and undermine public expectations about democracy. Not only do we need to rethink attacks against democracy, we also need to rethink the attackers as well. This is one key reason why we wrote what was then a new research paper which uses ideas from computer security to understand the relationship between democracy and information. These ideas help us understand attacks which destabilize confidence in democratic institutions or debate. Our research did imply several years ago anyway, that insider attacks from within American politics can be more pernicious than attacks from other countries. And why would you have that happening? Well, political union. To own the globalists. Anyway, they are more sophisticated, the attacks from within, that is, employ tools that are harder to defend against, like perhaps the use of the institutional power of the presidency, and lead to harsh political trade-offs. The U.S. can threaten charges or impose sanctions when Russian trolling agencies attack its democratic system, but what punishments can it use when the attacker is the U.S. president? And at some point, in the distant past, you might have thought, well, maybe it's actually more plausible to use, to impose sanctions and threaten charges here in the United States against American citizens using the U.S. courts. It's the sanctions against foreign actors that sometimes are, intangibles. Like, well, if they come to this country, we'll arrest them, or we'll prevent them from traveling here or withdrawing money that they have in a bank here. That's bad. But we can't grab them and put them on trial. But at least here in the United States, no one is above the law, and even the president of the United States might eventually have to face charges, and we can put him in jail, and, well, maybe not. Anyway, authoritarians, it says in the next section here as a section title, authoritarians have weaponized information flows. So how does that work out? People who think about cybersecurity build on ideas about confrontations between states during the Cold War. Intellectuals such as Thomas Schelling developed deterrence theory, which explained how the U.S. and USSR could maneuver to limit each other's options without ever actually going to war. Deterrence theory and related concepts about the relative ease of attack and defense seem to explain the trade-off that the U.S. and rival states faced as they started to use cyber techniques to probe and compromise each other's information networks. However, these ideas fail to acknowledge one key difference between the Cold War and today. Nearly all states, whether democratic or authoritarian, are entangled on the internet. This creates both new tensions and new opportunities. The U.S. assumed that the internet would help spread American liberal values and that this was a good and uncontroversial thing. Illiberal states like Russia and China feared that internet freedom was a direct threat to their own systems of rule. And it probably was. At some point, I might add. Opponents of the regime might use social media and online communications to coordinate among themselves and appeal to the broader public, perhaps toppling their governments, as happened in Tunisia during the Arab Spring. This led illiberal states to develop new domestic defenses against open information flows. As scholars like Molly Roberts have shown, states like China and Russia discovered how they could flood internet discussion with online nonsense and distraction, making it impossible for their opponents to talk to each other or even to distinguish between truth and falsehood. These flooding techniques stabilized authoritarian regimes because they demoralized and confused the regime's opponents. Libertarians often argue that the best antidote to bad speech is more speech. What Vladimir Putin discovered was that the best antidote to more speech was bad speech. Russia saw the Arab Spring and efforts to encourage democracy in its neighborhood as direct threats and began experimenting with counteroffensive techniques. When a Russia-friendly government in Ukraine collapsed due to popular protests, remember the entire timeline of the Ukraine situation, right? Russia tried to destabilize new democratic elections by hacking the system through which the election results would be announced. The clear intention was to discredit the election results by announcing fake voting numbers that would throw public discussion into disarray. This attack on public confidence in election results was thwarted at the last moment. Even so, it provided the model for a new kind of attack. Hackers don't have to secretly alter people's votes to affect elections. All they need to do is damage the public confidence that votes were counted fairly. As researchers have argued, simply put, the attacker might not care who wins. The losing side, believing that the election was stolen from them, may be equally, if not more, valuable. The country ends up destroying itself, right? Turn our government against itself. Turn our country against itself. Just exactly what the Ukrainians were warning the Republicans of in June of 2016 when they showed up to speak to the Republican leadership of the House, at which time Kevin McCarthy blurts out that he thinks Putin pays Trump. Anyway, next section. Flooding and confidence attacks can destabilize democracy. These two kinds of attacks, flooding attacks aimed at destabilizing public discourse and confidence attacks aimed at undermining public belief in elections, were weaponized against the U.S. in 2016. Russian social media trolls, hired by the Internet Research Agency, flooded online political discussions with rumors and counter-rumors in order to create confusion and political division. Peter Pomerantsev describes how, in Russia, one moment Putin's media wizard Surkov would fund civic forums and human rights NGOs, and the next, he would quietly support nationalist movements that accused those same NGOs of being tools of the West. Similarly, Russian trolls tried to, say, get Black Lives Matter protesters and anti-Black Lives Matter protesters to march at the same time and same place, to create conflict and the appearance of chaos. Guccifer 2.0's blog post was surely intended to undermine confidence in the vote, preparing the ground for a wider destabilization campaign after Hillary Clinton won the election. Neither Putin nor anyone else anticipated that Trump would win, ushering in chaos on a vastly greater scale. We do not know how successful these attacks were. A new book by John Sides, Michael Tesler, and Lynn Vavrek suggests that Russian efforts had no measurable long-term consequences. That doesn't sound like a great book, but there it is. Detailed research on the flow of news articles through social media by Yochai Benker, Robert Faris, and Hal Roberts agrees, showing that Fox News was far more influential in the spread of false news stories than in any Russian effort. However, global adversaries like the Russians aren't the only actors who can use flooding and confidence attacks. U.S. actors can use just the same techniques. Indeed, they can arguably use them better, since they have a better understanding of U.S. politics, more resources, and are far more difficult for the government to counter without raising First Amendment issues. For example, when the Federal Communications Commission asked for comments on its proposal to get rid of net neutrality, it was flooded by fake comments supporting the proposal. Nearly every real person who commented was in favor of net neutrality, but their arguments were drowned out by a flood of spurious comments purportedly made by identities stolen from porn sites, by people whose names and email addresses had been harvested without their permission, and in some cases from dead people. And you know how the Republicans feel about using dead people. This was done not just to generate fake support for the FCC's controversial proposal, it was to devalue public comments in general, making the general public's support for net neutrality politically irrelevant. FCC decision-making on issues like net neutrality used to be dominated by industry insiders, and many would like to go back to the old regime. Trump's efforts to undermine confidence in the Florida and Arizona votes work on a much larger scale. There are clear short-term benefits to asserting fraud where no fraud exists. This may sway judges or other public officials to make concessions to the Republicans to preserve their legitimacy. Yet they also destabilize American democracy in the long term. If Republicans are convinced that Democrats win by cheating, they will feel that their own manipulation of the system by purging voter rolls, making it more difficult to vote, and so on, are all legitimate as well, and very probably cheat even more flagrantly in the future, like by, say, forging electoral college votes. This will trash collective institutions and leave everyone worse off. I don't think even they foresaw the forging of electoral college votes at the time. It is notable that some Arizona Republicans, including Martha McSally, have so far stayed firm against pressure from the White House and the Republican National Committee to claim that cheating is happening. Don't worry, that breaks down in the next couple of years. They presumably see more long-term value from preserving existing institutions than undermining them. Very plausibly, Donald Trump has exactly the opposite incentives. By weakening public confidence in the vote today, he makes it easier to claim fraud and perhaps plunge American politics into chaos if he is defeated in 2020. Again, a reminder, this is from 2018 or 19 that they wrote this article? Let me just scroll back. Yeah, November 2018. And so here they are saying, well, Arizona Republicans are so far resisting this. 2 years later, they had in fact been so thoroughly broken that not only did they not resist it, they bankrupted the Arizona Republican Party, banking on a fraudulent election audit, and destroyed their own reputation in the process. Just, a reminder again of what the chronology is here. So next up, Trump lies about vote counting are a cybersecurity problem. If experts who see Russian flooding and confidence measures as cyber attacks on U.S. democracy are right, then these attacks are just as dangerous and perhaps more dangerous when they're used by domestic actors. The risk is that over time they will destabilize American democracy so that it comes closer to Russia's managed democracy, where nothing is real anymore, and ordinary people feel a mixture of paranoia, helplessness, and disgust when they think about politics. Paradoxically, Russian interference is far too ineffectual to get us there, but domestically mounted attacks by all-American political actors might. To protect against that possibility, we need to start thinking more systematically about the relationship between democracy and information. Our paper provides one way of doing this, highlighting the vulnerabilities of democracy against certain kinds of information attack. More generally, we need to build levees against flooding while shoring up public confidence in voting and other public information systems that are necessary to democracy. The first may require radical changes in how we regulate social media companies. I don't think they foresaw the purchase of Twitter on this one, but okay. Modernization of government commenting platforms to make them robust against flooding is only a very minimal first step. Up until very recently, companies like Twitter have won market advantage from bot infestations, even when it couldn't make a profit. It seemed that user numbers were growing. CEOs like Mark Zuckerberg have begun to worry about democracy, but their worries will likely only go so far. It is difficult to get a man to understand something when his business model depends on not understanding it. Greg tells us that all the time. Sharp and legally enforceable limits on automated accounts are a first step. Radical redesign of networks and of trending indicators so that flooding attacks are less effective may be a second. Well, we haven't made any progress on either of those two. The second requires general standards for voting at the federal level and a constitutional guarantee of the right to vote. Okay, no big deal, right? Just a constitutional amendment that we can totally pass. Technical experts nearly universally favor robust voting systems that would combine paper records with random post-election auditing to prevent fraud and secure public confidence in voting. Other steps to ensure proper ballot design and standardized vote counting and reporting will take more time and discussion, yet the record of other countries show that they are not impossible. The U.S. is nearly unique among major democracies in the persistent flaws of its election machinery, yet voting is not the only important form of democratic information. Apparent efforts to deliberately skew the U.S. Census against counting undocumented immigrants shows the need for a more general audit of the public information systems that we need if democracy is to function properly. It is easier to respond to Russian hackers through sanctions, counterattacks, and the like than it would be to respond to, I'm going to add a couple of words here, domestic political attacks that undermine U.S. democracy. To preserve the basic political freedoms of democracy requires recognizing that these freedoms are sometimes going to be abused by politicians such as Donald Trump. The best that we can do is minimize the possibilities of abuse up to the point where they encroach on basic freedoms and harden the general institutions that secure democratic information against attacks intended to undermine them. Maybe we'll have to look at their paper more closely in order to see what specifics they might suggest, although I would guess, though they'll probably be more heavy on specifics, I don't know whether they're any more simple to implement. Like in order to saying, well, something we need is to amend the Constitution to guarantee, the right to vote explicitly. Well, yeah, and a lot of people agree that we ought to, but thinking about how to get a constitutional amendment through which threatens essentially the Republican platform seems rather difficult. I don't know how you're going to get that one through when Republicans are dedicated to the ideal of enshrining the validity of the opposite, that there ought to be no right to vote and that it's something that should be revocable at their whim. That does seem like it's going to be very difficult to get done. Okay, so there you go. That was looming out there and something that I thought we ought to add to the mix. And gosh, there's more, but how much can we get through? I don't know. But let me introduce this other subject, another long read that is related to our overarching themes, but which we might not get all the way through, but you could might perhaps be interested in reading over the weekend. A February 26th opinion piece in the New York Times. Does anybody read the New York Times? But you probably heard people discussing this one. We hinted at it earlier. The crisis in teaching constitutional law. It's sort of interesting to see other institutional players come to these realizations here. Jesse Wegman, not related, I don't think, to the supermarket Wegmans, but Jesse Wegman, a member of the editorial board at the New York Times, writes this piece. If you attended law school at any time over the past half century, or you're thinking about it, right, Gil? Some others out there who've been thinking about this, your course in constitutional law likely followed a well-worn path, the traditional one. First, you learned the basics. The Supreme Court's power to say what the Constitution means. Marbury versus Madison, et cetera, right? Then you read or read and discussed cases that set precedents for different parts of the Constitution. The Commerce Clause, presidential powers, due process, equal protection, and so on. Finally, you studied how the court balances individual liberties against the government's need to act in the public interest. It was all based on an underlying premise that has long bound together everyone involved in the project of training the next generation of lawyers and other things like living by law, right? The Supreme Court is a legitimate institution of governance, and the 9 justices, whatever their political backgrounds, care about getting the law right. They are more interested in upholding fundamental democratic principles and, perhaps most important, preserving the court's integrity than in imposing a partisan agenda. Well, the premise no longer holds today. Many in the legal world still believed in the old virtues even after the Bush v. Gore case, the 5-4 ruling that effectively decided the 2000 presidential election on what appeared to many Americans to be partisan grounds. But now, the court's hard-right supermajority, installed in recent years through a combination of hypocrisy and sheer partisan muscle, has eviscerated any consensus. Under the pretense of practicing so-called originalism, which claims to interpret the Constitution in line with how it was understood at the nation's founding, these justices have moved quickly to upend decades of established precedent, from political spending to gun laws to voting rights to labor unions to abortion rights to affirmative action to the separation of church and state. Whatever rationale or methodology the justices apply in a given case, the results virtually always align with the political and policy priorities of the modern Republican Party. And that has made it impossible for many professors to teach in the familiar way. Teaching constitutional law today is an enterprise in teaching students what law isn't. Leah Littman a professor at the University of Michigan Law School told me. Rebecca Brown at the University of Southern California has been teaching constitutional law for 35 years. When I was working on my syllabus for this course, I literally burst into tears, she told me. I couldn't figure out how any of this makes sense. Why do we respect it? Why do we do any of it? I'm feeling very depleted by having to teach it. At least she's still trying. Larry Kramer, a widely respected legal scholar and historian who was my constitutional law professor at NYU 20 years ago, called it quits in 2008 on the heels of the Supreme Court's divisive decision in District of Columbia v. Heller, which struck down decades of precedent, and in fact more than just decades of precedent, to declare for the first time that the Second Amendment protects an individual right to bear arms. Many observers felt that Heller's majority opinion by Justice Antonin Scalia intentionally warped history to reach a preordained result. Professor Kramer was the dean of Stanford Law School at the time, and after the Heller ruling, he told me recently, I couldn't stand up in front of the class and pretend the students should take the court seriously in terms of legal analysis. First-year law students, he felt, should be taught by someone who still believed in what the court did. That's rather amazing. That's the end of the introductory section of this rather long article. Of course, we're not going to make it all the way through there, but just to give you an idea of what is in store, the other section headings, a profoundly different kind of court comes next. And perhaps then a new generation's lower expectations. Any other profoundly interesting section headers? That actually sums it up. But well worth your time in reading it, although a lot of it will probably be spent if you're Armando, saying, "Duh, of course." But still worth the time to find out that, yes, the realization is finally dawning on constitutional law professors that something is amiss here. Now time to hand things over for the end of the week to Justice Putnam for the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, for him to wrap things up and to take his sampling of the most important stories in his view from around the country and around the world.
You have been listening to Kagro in the Morning with David Waldman.
How about the international news here today? Let's see. The Chef's Table features this stuff where the editor of the top independent Russian newspaper was detained and later fined for discrediting the military. And at home, the Biden administration will investigate Chinese-made smart cars that can gather sensitive information about Americans driving them. Sounds awesome. Stay tuned.